Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our great sustainable seafood tour and welcome to the neighborhood. It's wonderful to see everyone again, old friends and new neighbors coming in. We've got a great program tonight. I'm really excited. We've got a lot of our friends from around the country joining us once again this week, and it's going to be a lot of fun. But for those of you who are new, I'll just do a little housekeeping here. Down at the bottom of your toolbar, you can click on participants and see everybody else who's joining us online today. And you can feel free to raise your hand if you have questions and we can call on you, or also use the chat screen so we can see how everybody's doing. It's fun to see so many of you back again this week. It's great to have you joining us for the Great Sustainable Seafood Tour. And we've had a kind of cloudy day in Napa Valley. I know you're used to seeing bright sunshine here every day that we've been on, but we've had a little bit of a cooling trend, which is kind of nice after the weather that we've been having. So we're out at the ranch with Michael Garcia, our manager of viticultural operations out there. Michael is giving us a fantastic view from the top of parcel 19, looking out at parcel 25, which is all Sauvignon Blanc. That flat ground right in front of you is all Saint Supéry Sauvignon Blanc. And a little over to the left is where the semillon is grown that we're including in the wine today. But basically everything in front of you that you see except that far ridge line is part of our Dollarhide Ranch. And just a spectacular day even with those clouds today, although a lot cooler. I think it was running about in the 60s today, whereas last week we were in the 90s, but a great day. And you can see a lot more growth has been happening over the last 6 weeks out there. So really pretty spectacular day. So at Dollarhide, we planted Sauvignon Blanc first in 1983 with parcel 5, and we planted some clone 1 Sauvignon Blanc. And that parcel is still used today, and that makes up predominantly our single vineyard Dollarhide Sauvignon Blanc and a little bit of this wine that we see today. But what's important about that parcel is over 20 years ago, our winemaker Michael Scholes was out there tasting the grapes right before harvest, tasting them, and he selected a handful of vines that he thought were particularly expressive with that great green lime and pink grapefruit flavors that we get in our Sauvignon Blanc. And the ground that you're looking at in front of you, those parcels, which includes parcel 25 and down below there, Ryan, you'll see those parcels have all been propagated with that budwood. So that budwood, over 20 years ago, we propagated 2 rows, then 2 acres, and now the majority of all of our Sauvignon Blanc on the property is our own field selection of Sauvignon Blanc that's unique to Saint Supéry. And all that Sauvignon Blanc that you see in front of you is that field selection of Clone 1, which is pretty darn cool. An exciting component to the wine that we're having today. I hope everyone's opened the Virtú. I'm always getting in trouble for not telling you to pour yourself a glass of wine at the beginning. But I'm drinking the 2018 Virtú, which is, of course, our Semillon and Sauvignon Blanc blend. And that's 54% Semillon and the rest being Sauvignon Blanc. And the label, of course, is the artist's rendition of what Saint Supéry would look like if there really was a saint. And that's from Daniel Chang, an artist in Southern California here, did this rendition, a beautiful, beautiful label. And so let's have a sip of this delicious wine and jump over to Brooke, who's at the winery there in Rutherford. And Brooke can tell us a little bit about the fermentation on these 2 beautiful white wines that make up the Virtú, and a little bit about the fermentation methods and the blending, because this wine is really, it's really lush and delicious. And tell us how you make it, Brooke.
Sure. So there's a lot of different layers to this wine, as you'll see as you're tasting it, but it's always going to be a Semillon dominant blend. So Semillon is a little bit rarely grown in California, but it does well in kind of warm climates. And Semillon's interesting because the fruit profile that you get from it is lemon, lemongrass, maybe like some apple. And as a young wine, Semillon tends to be shy on the fruit characteristics, but as it ages in the cellar and as it ages in bottle, it kind of builds. It begins to build and change and get more volume. And it's kind of similar to a red wine. A red wine needs a little bit of time, and Semillon needs a little bit of time to show its full potential. So it's a little bit of a different white wine than Sauvignon Blanc or Chardonnay, where those show more fruit expression in the beginning. So our Semillon comes from Dollarhide that you just saw. We hand pick it and we press it to tank, and then we'll actually ferment all of the Semillon in French oak barrels. About 34% of that will be new French oak, and the balance of the barrels will be used French oak. So fermenting in the oak, it allows this great oak interaction, I guess, with the fruit flavors of the Semillon. And after fermentation, it's going to age on its lees in the barrel, on its yeast lees, and that creates kind of a creaminess to the palate that you'll get on this wine. And we'll go through it once a week and we'll stir those barrels, which will mix that yeast lees up in the wine and also contribute to the creaminess and the volume of the wine and the flavor profile. So Sauvignon Blanc, on the other hand, is very expressive as a young wine. It's, can you still see me?
We lost you, Brooke.
Yeah. Somebody is calling me, even though I put it on Do Not Disturb, so I'm going to decline it. Sorry about that. So Sauvignon Blanc is very expressive as a young wine, and our fruit at Dollarhide, as Emma mentioned, we get a lot of pink grapefruit and yellow grapefruit zest and green lime flavors. And with our Sauvignon Blanc, we'll bring it in to the winery. We'll press it to stainless steel. We'll peel a little bit of that off to barrel as well, to ferment in barrel, to go into this blend, and the balance of it will be in stainless steel. We'll ferment it in stainless steel. That will keep real good purity of that vineyard expression that we get with that grapefruit and citrus, passion fruit flavors. So then we take all these different components, I guess, and we put the blend together, and that creates the layer that you're tasting in this glass. We get as a young wine, we'll show the Sauvignon Blanc will kind of take the front row, and it'll show the citrus and the powerful grapefruit. And then the Semillon will be in the back seat with a little lemongrass and lemon butter. And then you'll get the seductive kind of French oak as well in there. And then as the wine ages in bottle, it's going to change, and the Semillon's going to start to take lead, and the Sauvignon Blanc's going to pull back. So the Semillon will build in its volume and flavor expression, and the Sauvignon Blanc will kind of take a bit back seat. So this wine is actually excellent to age, and not all white wines are made for aging, but this one definitely is, and it's very interesting to taste it when we first bottle it as to a year later, and it's going to always be a different wine, which is pretty incredible.
Yeah, I love this wine as it gets a little bit of age on it, and particularly with a roast chicken or something a little bit heartier, as that Semillon comes out and that you get that volume and the lemongrass. It's really just delicious. And wherever I travel all over the world, the chefs always want to use this wine in their pairings, because it's just a wonderful wine with food and a broad range of food, which makes it a lot of fun. And when you have a chance to come back and visit us, one of the things you can do is blend your own version of Virtú and see if you can put a match to Brooke and Michael's blend. We'll let you do that when you come back to visit us. So we're looking forward to that. Chef Todd, you are our master of food and wine pairing. Tell us, a little bit about what you're going to do today with the food and wine pairing with Virtú, and how versatile this wine is.
Oh, of course. It is pretty interesting that maybe a really simple wine would have less ingredients, a much more simple dish. But when I know that there's so much going on and so much that went into the process of the wine that gives it unique characteristics, and I know that the food that I actually prepare or try to match up with it can also handle quite a few of the different nuances or ingredients or textures and things like that. And so that's really what I'm looking at, is to try to, number one, start with the wine, the beautiful Virtú to start with, and then to pair up the food to kind of match that same body or the same complexity that we have going on there. And luckily our Virtú, our 2018, has a nice bright finish on acid, as well as everything else going on in there. And so it makes it especially food friendly when it comes to sustainable seafood. So we are talking about sustainable seafood. This is one of our sessions that we're doing that is basically featuring the cooking technique of frying, whether that be pan frying or deep frying. And what I decided to do was choose or select and feature oysters. So we have guests who are going to speak about oysters as well. We are in the middle of our Great Sustainable Seafood Tour. So oysters are one of the most green and highly ranked aquaculture systems. It's fantastic on both the East Coast and the West Coast as far as being able to source great oysters, which are not only readily available pretty much throughout the year now, but also very sustainable and good for the environment, good for the ocean, the coastlines, but they are also very nutritious for you. They can have some wonderful benefits from there. I will be preparing some oysters. I'm going to show you in a little bit here how I'm going to prepare those. We did ask a specialist from Hama Hama Oysters up in Washington State to come and join us. And we have Sara Harvey from the saloon at Hama Hama Oysters, who has joined us, who will talk about her specific oysters and the operation that they have going on there. Welcome, Sara.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
My pleasure.
Thanks for joining us.
Absolutely.
Would you be able to kind of describe the operation there and what makes your Hama Hama oyster so unique? I know I've eaten my share of them and I really enjoy them. So if you can let everyone else know, that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. Hama Hama is it's a family-owned company. We're in our 5th generation of farming here on the same land. The farm oysters started about 65 years ago here on the beach during a joke that was they were trying to sell the farm and Bert wouldn't let him go because it was the best trout fishing. So that's how we started farming oysters. They couldn't give up the homestead. And it's turned into a really amazing piece because we are one of the biggest advocates for sustainability out here on the West Coast. Our ownership speaks with national panels regularly, Puget Sound Growers Association, about ways to be more sustainable in our farming. Oysters are fantastic in that they're one of the few farmed products we have in this country that don't rely on additional food or additional water sources. And also are filter feeders, meaning that they each filter about 60 gallons of water a day per oyster. So imagine the billions of oysters that we have out there just working head over gills, I guess, to keep the waters clean. Hama Hama is the only property that backs up to this farm. Behind us is the National Forest. So they have a huge amount of stewardship when it comes to the quality of water coming down the river. Earlier, Todd was talking about terroir in one of our earlier sessions, and terroir is one of the words that we use a lot around here. I believe Rowan Jacobson started using that a number of years ago, but it really describes the flavor of the oysters reflecting the water that they grow in. That oyster nectar in each oyster is kind of the last gasp of water that they take from their estuary. So when you look at the different salinity levels, they're reflective of not just the oyster, but of the salinity in the water as well. And that reflects growing location, the season, and the age of the oyster. Spring oysters tend to be a little bit sweeter and creamier. Fall oysters are a little bit more salty. They've just finished spawning. So all of that rich oyster belly disappears during the summer months, which is why we don't tend to eat oysters in the hot summer months. But in the winter, they continue to bulk up. And then by the time we hit April, they're just these fat, juicy little morsels, which are perfect for frying or grilling or any of the cooked oyster preparations that I think really go well with the Virtú wine.
I do too. Sara, that's a great point because I know that a lot of people feel like it's a set rule in place that if a month has an R in it, ends in an R, that you should avoid oysters. What are your thoughts on that?
I would say that you can eat oysters well all year round. However, we recommend from May to September either cooking your oysters or getting them from a real specific cold water source. So Hama Hama manages 12 different farms here in the Puget Sound. We're all within an hour of each other. And those farms up north that are on the Strait of Juan de Fuca that have really cold ocean waters are where we pull our summer oysters from. The temperature never rises above 50 degrees in the water, and so those oysters don't trigger to spawn in the same way. We also grow some triploids, which are non-spawning oysters, which have been cultivated specifically for kind of oyster months when you tend to get real heavy spawn.
It's interesting that the cold weather, and a lot of people may not necessarily realize that, but one of the things that affects that merroir and the difference between East Coast and West Coast oysters, they're both delicious and both have unique characteristics, but the temperature on the West Coast is actually colder because of the current and the water that runs through, more so than the East Coast, which is just a slight bit warmer. And it creates different characteristics and the difference between the two. You might find maybe a little more cucumbery, kind of melon characteristics that come out of our Pacific type versus
Absolutely.
ones that are a little more salinity, a little more salt, or kind of a crispness that comes from the East Coast oysters. So I haven't met an oyster, whether it's East Coast or West Coast, that I don't like yet. It's all about choosing some of the best, and I really appreciate the Hama Hama ones.
Fantastic.
Can you recommend maybe some of your dishes that you have in the actual saloon that would go really well with our Virtú?
Yeah, definitely. We do. One of the things that we're really well known for is our grilled oysters. And so we grill them on an open flame. Sometimes in the summer, we'll do them in an oven to prevent some of the other exposure when we have a million people. But we'll grill them with a chipotle bourbon butter is one of our favorite recipes. And it's a little spicy, a little sweet. It's got a ton of garlic in it. But that real fatty body of the cooked oyster needs something that can kind of stand up to it. So your normal kind of shellfish go-tos, albariños and things tend to fall a little bit flatter. That's usually when I'll steer somebody towards a semillon or a Chardonnay even.
That sounds great. I also noticed that I was looking on your website. I know that the standard Hama Hama oysters, but I didn't realize that you actually have some different varieties that you have trademarked that are kind of interesting.
Yeah, we do. We grow predominantly Pacific oysters, which are the big, fast-growing oyster available out here. Olympias are tiny, but we've trademarked a couple of our oysters because of the cultivation methods that we use. Hama was one of the first companies to start tumbling oysters around here, and our blue pool oysters are. I've tried Shigokus and Kushis and the Chelsea Gems, and I really stand behind the blue pool. They're a fantastic product that Adam's been working on for almost 20 years. And they demonstrate the tumbled method incredibly well. They're really deep cup, perfectly even oyster. All the extra growth is knocked off, and all that growth goes back into the belly. I always tell people it's like oysters that go to Pilates class. You know, they're tight, they look great, and they've got a fantastic belly on them.
That's a great analogy right there.
I love that.
Wonderful.
Wow, those are some fantastic pictures. Tell us about what you do with the oyster shells, Sarah.
We from the saloon, we'll take our shells and we put them in a shell pile for a couple of years to let the bacteria to die off them. But then we take all of our oyster shell, we put it back on the beach. And all of the shucked oysters that we sell, which are one of our biggest products, all of those shells go immediately back to the beach. The oysters like to spawn in warm water, but when after they've done their little magic together in the water, that seed likes to end up on something. And oyster shell is the friendliest landing for oysters. So the more oyster shell on your beach, the more natural oyster spawn has to stick to, and you get a better natural harvest. So they used to set out shell to collect spat and then bring it back up the beach. But now we just add our shells back to help cultivate that natural one.
Excellent. That's really cool. Well, Chef Todd, all this talk of oysters is making everyone really hungry. So why don't you show us what you're going to cook tonight and give us a little inspiration. We might all be emailing Sarah to ship us some oysters to make this dish on Saturday.
Absolutely, my pleasure. There are multiple ways of treating oysters, all depending. Some people may be maybe oyster beginners, maybe a little bit squeamish about eating raw oysters, possibly even about shucking your own oysters, which is the best way because they're so fresh. Depending on the wine that I'm really showcasing and trying to feature, I can adjust the style of preparation, the cooking method, or whatever may be the ingredients to really pair up best with that particular wine. And that's the fun part that I get to have. You can eat them raw in the half shell. They're absolutely delicious that way. Simple, natural, very clean. That goes great with our Napa Valley Sauvignon Blanc, very crisp and bright and fresh. And then you can also go a little bit heavier. I've done a method where we took a compound butter and put it on top of an oyster on the half shell, put some breadcrumbs over the top, and then baked it from there. And now another step that will go even further into this would be to actually make crispy oysters by breading them. And the breading could be anything from sourdough, it could be panko bread crumbs, like Japanese style. It could be any bread that you have. It could be crackers, saltines, anything like that that creates a crispy crust on the outside. And the fact that you are frying them in the fat, in the oil, is going to give them even more richness and mouthfeel to it. And that creaminess, I think, will go really well with the Virtú. And so what I did to showcase some of our local and best oysters, the green rated oysters that we have, I went ahead and grabbed some of our Marin Miyagi oysters. These are a Pacific variety of oysters. I have them on ice. I basically scrub them down so that there's no additional mud or anything on there. I do have a nice oyster shucker, so you're going to want to get yourself one if you don't already have one. Please do not use a screwdriver or a paring knife, because paring knives could be very dangerous and you might end up accidentally hurting yourself, cutting straight through, slipping, or even breaking the paring knife. So be careful with that. That's part of the utensil or the tools that you would need. The recipe is included in the invite for this, but it basically includes a classic remoulade sauce, and you'll find different variations on this. It is essentially like a really savory mayonnaise-based sauce. This happens to have a lot of green herbs in there. Fresh herbs especially go really well with Sauvignon Blanc because of the brightness and that fresh crispness that it has. So in this case, from our garden this morning, as I was walking through, I went ahead and picked some tarragon from our garden. I also picked some fennel. I have some baby parsley here. I put in some chives as well. So it's got a lot of fresh green herbs in there. The other ingredients, you can either use some green onions or some spring onion in this case. You could use shallots. This happens to be cornichon, the little French pickle, very tart, not necessarily like a dill pickle, not sweet, but it has a nice crunch texture to it. And then we also have some capers. So that brininess is almost an automatic that goes really well with oysters. And because our 2018 vintage has a higher level of acid, I can go a little more acidic on this without overpowering the acidic finish on there. To kind of bring it all in together is to put a little bit of Dijon mustard in there. So if you basically chop everything up nice and fine, and then you mix it all into your mayonnaise base. You could have put a little bit of garlic in there. It calls for a touch of paprika. If you want to put just a tiny bit of chili spice, maybe just a tiny bit so it's not too spicy, that works as well. Now you already have acid and brininess coming from these two ingredients. If you wanted to put some more lemon or citrus, you're more than welcome to do that as well. So I have my sauce all ready to go. I'm going to go ahead and show you the shucking part of the oysters, just so if you haven't done them before, you'll see how they can be done. If you happen to be lucky enough where you can go to a place where you can buy a bag and shuck your own, that's one great way to do it. Some of you may have worked in industry where your job was to shuck oysters, and it's probably one of the best ways to learn how to do it. That's how I learned basically throughout. And everyone has a personal preference on how to shuck their oysters, but I will say you may need like a safety glove that you can wear. I become comfortable by using a kitchen towel, any kind of padding or something that will keep it not only from slipping, but also act as a little protector in case you happen to jab yourself. The oysters themselves, especially the Pacific oysters, have a rippled kind of a round outer edge, the front lip to it. And they also have the hinge down here at the very bottom. And that's what we're looking for, is the hinge, because that's the entry point for the tip of this oyster shucker. So the tool is going to fit in there. I'm going to go ahead and hold this and basically try to keep the cup. There's a flat side, which I know is the top. And then there's also the deep cup. Sarah was talking about the deep cup by tumbling her oysters, and it creates this deep cup where all the juices stay intact inside. I want those juices in there, all that beautiful nectar. So I'm going to go ahead and keep that nice and level and flat. I'm going to insert the tip of this paring knife, the oyster shucker, and I'm going to wiggle a little bit as I'm pushing in, but not pushing so hard to the point where it slides through and it damages straight into the oyster. I want to go up over the top and then flip it and lift the top of the top shell lid off. So by holding, by tipping just a bit, now I've popped it, and I can actually turn and then slide the actual shucker right through, and then flap that right off the top. Now around the edges, I'm going to take a look to make sure there's no shell fragments on here. Nice amount of juice in this one. And then I will take the blade and kind of scrape down where that abductor muscle is. That's the connector that has the connection for both the top and the bottom shell. Now it's free and loose. That's what you would do if you were going to slurp these and just eat them on the half shell. So it's a matter of clearing the top off and then coming down and freeing off the bottom, making sure there's no additional shells. Look at the beautiful color on the rim on that. So what I'm going to do is basically take those oysters, and since we're frying them today, I'm going to go ahead and put them into my buttermilk mixture. And this is in the recipe as well. It's buttermilk with a tiny bit of chili sauce, some lemon zest, and then a little salt and pepper. So I'm going to go ahead and pour them right in there along with some of the juice that goes with it. You can really see how deep that cup is on that oyster. It's beautiful. And so you want to shuck a few of those, as many as you can. You can also buy oysters that are already shucked for you. They can come in a jar or a can, and you can use those out of convenience. Here, I'll show you one more method that may be a little bit easier, especially if you're first beginning. Instead of holding it in your hand like I'm very comfortable with after all these years, you may want to actually do this by setting it on the table, covering it over, inserting the same idea, and then again, just a little twist and wiggle until it pops. And that way it doesn't slide around, a little less chance of you possibly cutting yourself. And then just basically slide underneath and go up towards the front. And then you want to release from the bottom. You get those little shell fragments off the outside. Now that we've got it freed up from the abductor muscle, it's either a slurp or it goes straight into our buttermilk bath. So that's the process on shucking your own oysters. Of course, it would be something that you could have fun with and practice doing. Now that we have our oysters right here, you can let them marinate for just a little bit in this mixture. I do have an addition to the recipe, and that is to have some flour here. So here is my a little bit of flour, all-purpose flour. Here are my oysters. This is my breading setup, basically my coating setup. There's my oysters that are marinating. And then I do happen to have a combination mixture that is some panko breadcrumbs as well as some standard breadcrumbs. So it's just a combination there. And what I'm going to do first and foremost is I'm going to take the oyster, lift them off that excess brine or the excess marinade, very lightly coat them in the flour, just enough to kind of dry. And what this is going to do is allow the mixture. I'm going to go back in. So this is almost like double dunking. You might have fried chicken done this way as well. See recipes like that. But I'm going to go back into the buttermilk mix. And this will help to create a little more even and thick crust, the coating. After I've tossed these around, I'm going to go straight into the breading. And I'm being careful not to puncture the oysters, more or less just flip them and turn them without getting my hands all coated. Now I have some neutral oil that's been heating up, and I'm using cast iron because it'll hold the heat nice and evenly. You don't have to necessarily use cast iron. You can use another pot. What I'm going to do today is basically a pan fry method. So by pan frying, there's a shallow amount of oil in here. You could also use a deep fryer if you had. Another option or alternative that has become popular now is to have air fryers where you are not frying with oil. I haven't used them myself, but I would imagine these could probably work out pretty well because of the fact that there's so much moisture in the oysters themselves that they won't dry out necessarily, and they should definitely help to brown up the breadcrumbs and the crust on the outside. So now that we have our oil in our pan, basically about, maybe if you were to temp it, it might be about 325 to 350 degrees. And you can use a deep frying thermometer if you have a candy thermometer or something like that if you wanted to check it. Now in this case, what I'm going to do is basically fry these maybe for about 30 seconds on each side. I'm looking at the color and the brownness on the outside, but I also don't want to overcook them so much that the oysters lose their flavor or their texture. All right, so now that we have a nice even coating, I can set these in, and when I set it in, I want to set it and put it away from myself so that it doesn't splatter. If you happen to drop it, it might splatter and cause damage. You might get little burns, so be careful with that. And you'll notice that there's maybe only about half an inch to an inch worth of the oil in the pan. You want to keep water away from there, obviously, so it doesn't create a splatter effect going on. So as those cook up, I'll keep an eye on them. You'll start to see some browning around the edge of the breadcrumbs there. One of the nice things about this preparation is it cooks the oysters to the point where, you know, if you happen to be a little squeamish about eating them on the raw, now you have cooked texture, so maybe it's a little more approachable for you. To me, either way, I can eat oysters any particular way, so it's pretty easy for me to enjoy them one way or the other. Now they do have moisture in them. You also had a marinade on there with the buttermilk, so there is a possibility that it might splatter just a little bit, so you want to be careful with that. But it's relatively quick and easy. You can imagine the same kind of frying process, pan frying, for anything else, whether it be small bay scallops or possibly shrimp, anything like that would work well. Beautiful color there. Flip them over once they're crispy. Got that nice texture. Little deep fried food never hurt anyone.
We're putting on that COVID-19 again.
There we go. So what I had done up ahead of time here is I made a plate, a little show plate, and I went out to the garden and I picked some fennel, some baby carrots, mixed rainbow carrots, and I basically shaved them. So this is a little bit of a bed, not only for eating, for crunch and texture, freshness, but also a little elevation to keep everything up and off, so that as you set these down, they don't necessarily sog out by being all flat on the plate. So what I'm going to do now is take these off and drain them. I have a plate here. Of course, I made some extra ahead of time, just for sakes of saving time, just to show you. So I have plenty of oysters here, more for me.
Well, Sarah tells us they're good the next day too. You know.
Next day?
Yeah.
Well, yeah,
I don't
cold
think
fried
I've ever
oyster.
had that happen before. I don't know why, but I'll take her word for it. So now that we have all these beautiful oysters here, they're drained on paper towel. You can see they're even golden and crispy, but yet you still have that nice plumpness on the inside of them. Now what I'm going to do is just basically garnish our plate here so that you have either a party platter or Chef Todd's personal plate of oysters for himself. So basically taking these and just kind of arranging them around. You can,
Oh, those look amazing.
you can keep the remoulade sauce onto the side as opposed to putting it on there so they don't get too crispy or too soggy, excuse me. You want to keep and maintain that crust. So let's go like that. Let's say there's a nice amount right there. One other thing that ties in really nicely could be some lemon. If you wanted to hit a little lemon zest right over the top, you pick up more of that perfume that goes with that lemongrass kind of characteristic. So you could definitely use some of this to brighten it up. And this should be really fantastic with the Virtú. If you have a sip of the wine first and you go and you dunk right into that, and then go back to your wine again, it should be a really nice mix. I think the acid finish on the end of it will brighten it up nicely. Another fun element and a surprise little thing that I thought I would pull out is one of my favorite things, and we talked about this in one of our other sessions, is to be able to do actually with almost all the same ingredients here, a nice Oyster Po-Boy. So this is oyster, all the same exact fried oysters, along with some nice butter lettuce. Here's some more of the shaved crunchy vegetables that I thought I would put on here for garnish. And I can use that exact same remoulade. It has the acid, it's got that richness, it's got the fresh herbs in there. So I can use that and build myself a nice Oyster Po-Boy. Slather this on.
Oh, wow. Looking pretty decadent there, Todd.
You want to go with your beautiful butter lettuce for crispness. Here's some of your garnish of the crunchy vegetables from the garden. And then let's put a few of our oysters right on top there. Now you have crunch. You have the wonderful oyster intensity, the umami characteristic. Load it all up. And all this is on a buttered brioche bun that I toasted off ahead of time. Squeeze a little lemon on there.
Wow. That looks amazing.
And this should be a wonderful way to turn it into a meal, where maybe this one could be a nice appetizer or hors d'oeuvre at a party. And then you could also just take this po' boy and turn it into a full-on decadent kind of an entree.
Wow, that looks fantastic. I've got PJ Myers from the East Coast got his hand up. So PJ, let's hear what you need. I'm sure dying to ask Chef a question.
Hi, PJ.
So my question for Chef Todd is, when frying oysters versus other seafood, is there a specific type of oil you like to use? Oysters versus other seafood, is there a universal oil you like, and why do you like it?
You know, I guess if it might be a personal preference. You know, a lot of times the smoke point comes into play. In a case of pan frying, I'm not really frying too high a temperature to the point where it gets to the point where the oil will start to break down. There are some recipes I might call for, or regions in the country where they use things like peanut oil, which isn't necessarily the healthiest, but it is delicious and it has a really high smoke point. So it's kind of personal preference, or maybe what somebody grew up eating, or what some grandmother showed somebody how to use. For myself, and for the most part, I'm going to cook with a pure oil like canola oil, a vegetable oil, something like that, unless I really want to impart a different flavor to it. Even if I were to, let's say, use olive oil for something, I'm a little bit leery about using really good extra virgin olive oil, because it can kind of degrade the quality of the oil, and that passes off the flavor into the food. Sometimes those best extra virgin olive oils are used for drizzling over and finishing into desserts or into dressings and things like that. But otherwise, I'm always leery about using too many flavored oils in there. I might use a flavored oil to finish, depending on what it is as well. So whether I'm frying something like shrimp or scallops or crab cakes or oysters, anything like that, for the most part, just for me as a professional, personal kind of a go-to, I like a cleaner kind of a neutral oil. So as long as it has a fairly high smoke point, you don't have to worry about it breaking down or giving off some kind of acrid flavors to it.
Well, everybody wants you to take a bite of that sandwich online.
This one?
Yeah, they're begging for it. They're dying.
So the sauce really pulls it together. I have to tell you, the sauce really pulls it together. It's so much better than like a standard tartar sauce. You know, it's not nearly as sweet. Yes, it has pickles in it, but these are cornichons and then the capers in there, and all of those fresh herbs with the licorice and the anise that you pick up from the fennel and the tarragon. It really pulls it all in together. I don't want to tease everybody by eating in front of everyone.
You're making everyone very, very hungry and giving us all a lot of inspiration. I think we're going to be ordering online from Hama Hama and getting to work on Saturday.
Good.
A little
so
time.
they're a lot of fun. They're a lot of fun to do. It's not too intimidating. Like I say, if you wanted to, you could also buy some really good quality already shucked oysters if you needed to.
That looks amazing.
That looks amazing. Absolutely amazing. And also tonight, we're really honored to have Chef Daniel Bruce with us from the Boston Harbor Hotel. And Daniel, you are an amazing chef and a master of food and wine pairing yourself. You started 31 years ago, you started the Boston Wine Festival, which goes on for months of vintners from all over the world, and your fantastic food pairings for a couple of months that are just amazing. Sadly, you guys are closed for a little while, but we're looking forward to you reopening. But last time I was with you, we had this, you made a beautiful fluke, and we had this wine with it. It was just fantastic. So I know you have lots of great food and wine pairing suggestions for this wine.
Yeah, sure. Especially younger. I think Brooke talked about it earlier. As it ages, I think you can start using all these other flavors, like, you know, using whether it's rabbit or chicken or even mushrooms, because of the earthiness of it and the full-bodied, unctuous quality that you get as it ages. But I have the 2018 as well that you graciously sent. And yeah, I think it works great with seafood. I really like it with whitefish, whether it's sole, fluke, flounder, dab, halibut, whatever your choice is. We're lucky in Boston. Obviously, we're in one of the best seafood regions in the world, with almost 36 different species available. And I love cooking with fish, and I think this wine is perfect with it. And I also think it goes really well with Asian flavors. I think somebody was mentioning lemongrass, which is true. It gets a lot of lemongrass edge to it. And I think whether it's ginger, coconut, combination of all those flavors really work well with the Virtú as well. And I think what you're showing up there, that's actually roasted. That's roasted pear with Virtú, which also works really well because that's not a ripe pear, that's a green pear. So it's not too high in residual sugar, which is important as well.
Oh, fantastic. And you have an amazing selection of sustainable seafood and oysters there. Tell us a little bit about the different varieties of oysters you have and their flavor profiles.
Sure. Obviously, on the East Coast, all the oysters are from one species, which is Virginicus. But because of where they grow, you are where you eat, so to speak. And if you're up in Prince Edward Island, which is red clay, you sort of get that sort of clay edge to it. When you move to the rocky coast of Maine, like Pemaquid or Damascata, the oysters pick up sort of a briny but a little sweet plumpness to them. And of course, you move down to Massachusetts, whether it's Wellfleet, Cutthroat, Island Creek, they tend to pick up sort of the flavor of a little bit warmer water. And I think Brooke or somebody mentioned earlier that is true. The salinity of the water makes a big influence on the flavor of the oysters, but also whether it's rocky, clay, sandy, etc. So yeah, perfect. They're great. I tend to go with Maine oysters, but it's not because I'm from Maine. I think they're great.
Well, lots of wonderful suggestions. And you mentioned mushrooms there, and I know you're a huge forager, and this must be really good foraging season for you right now. Have you been finding anything extra special that you might pair with this wine?
Well, this time of year in New England, it's too early for mushrooms, though morels will be here soon. But right now, there's ramps, fiddleheads, wild stinging nettles, and the herbaceousness of those wild edibles, I think, really work well with this as well, because sometimes opposites attract. And in this case, I think that bright, citrus edge to this with the lemongrass also works well with the herbs that Chef Todd was talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Todd, did you have a question? You looked like you had a question.
Sure,
for
I was just going to say, being in another great seafood area, such as Boston right there, and that wonderful location that you have, do you have some go-to suppliers for your sustainable seafood? How do you go about sourcing everything for all the outlets in the hotel and all your operations that you have going on?
Sure. For me, my relationships have always been on a personal note. So I know the fishermen. My dad was and still is a registered Maine fishing guide. So I know a lot of the fishermen up there. So for me, it's really important to stay in touch with these guys, because they do a tremendous job, and it's not easy to harvest, whether it's lobster or ground fish or even going deep water. So that's important. But Foley Fish is sort of one of my go-to purveyors in town. But I also like to deal with the fishermen one-on-one. So, and I do that with all my ingredients. I think that's key to having a successful restaurant and a fodder of great ingredients.
I agree. I'm much more familiar with Pacific oysters. I know that the East Coast oysters are fantastic as well. I'm not biased by any means, but they do have a certain different characteristic because they come from that different terroir, but also the water temperature is a little bit different. Do you happen to have a favorite oyster of yours that you kind of tend to go to if you happen to go to an oyster bar?
Yeah, I think my favorite by far is Pemaquid. Pemaquid is sort of heading north on the coast of Maine, Damascata River. I'm not sure how well everyone knows the Penobscot River in that area, because they're cool enough where they have great flavor, but there's a little sweetness to them that I like on top of the salinity of those oysters. And they're also a larger oyster, which, I like those. I'm a big oyster fan. I've been known to eat a lot of oysters at one time.
Can't blame you. Yeah, they're delicious and they're really good for you too.
Sorry. Oysters on the hash shell are great. Of course, in New England, we make a great oyster stew. And I think the key is, if you're making an oyster stew, use the Virtú when you're deglazing. I mean, that's important to do that. When somebody mentioned earlier, they do grilled oysters. Put a splash of Virtú on it. If you're pairing it with Virtú, it's always great so they infuse the flavors, and that's another way of pairing.
Exactly. One of my tricks or tips that I do quite often, because I'm lucky to be right here with all the wines that are made available for me, is to actually utilize a lot of the wines in the cooking. And it doesn't have to be that way all the time, but it does create a natural bridge for us. So you're onto one of the secrets that we use.
Yeah, and the subtleties, obviously, as you know, is important. Not too spicy, not too sweet, but
exactly.
don't forget, if you're doing that, make sure you save the majority to drink and just a little bit to use in cooking, right, Emma?
Absolutely. That's my secret.
Exactly. And the more you have, everything tastes better at the end.
At the end.
Right? So.
Well, when you two are cooking, everything tastes fantastic. When I'm cooking, you might need an extra glass of wine. But thank you for those fantastic tips, Daniel. The other thing that we've been asking each week is, what would your pantry tip be? Because some of us are going to the grocery store maybe every other week, and things are getting low in the house. What would your pantry tip be to pair with this wine of something that you might find in one of those cupboards tucked away that we could make?
Wow, that's interesting. So I would say, I'm thinking of something that I wouldn't have because I have an abundance of ingredients here. But you know what I think would be really kind of neat is fennel. And I mean, whether it's fresh fennel or dried fennel, it really has a wonderful aromatic edge to it. And I think it would really work well, particularly with the Sauvignon Blanc edge. And I would toast it lightly first. And I think that's a key. If you're in the pantry and when you have some spices in the cabinet, make sure you toast them first, just a touch. It lets them blossom and have a little bit more flavor. So try that. I mean, it's easy, right? You have a glass of wine, throw a little fennel in there, taste it, and see what you think.
All right, excellent, thank you. And we have with us also tonight Neil Loomis from the Rendezvous Bistro, the Director of Fine Wine and Dining Restaurant Group in Jackson Hole, which is another national treasure. I think of Napa Valley being a national treasure, and for sure Jackson Hole is one of the most beautiful places on the planet. And we're so excited to have you with us, Neil, because I know you've been a huge supporter of our wines for a long time, and you get a lot of fresh, sustainable seafood shipped in there. So tell us what you're pairing this wine with.
Thank you. Thanks for having me today, and thanks to the whole St. Supéry team. Has been a great partnership for years and years, so it's cool to see the Napa Valley Jackson Hole thing kind of come together. And I did a little selection behind me with found some Virtú in our restaurant. I'm getting to sit in the Rendezvous Bistro right now, which I haven't been able to do for quite a while. We're open for to-go, pick up, curbside delivery, and might hear just a little bit of restaurant clatter in the background, which I'm kind of enjoying just a little bit of that.
Yeah,
well,
nice to get back.
Yeah, my pairing that I did, pulling away from oysters and the ocean, is freshwater, and it's the fish that is actually in our waters around here, in our rivers and our lakes, and that is trout. Cutthroat trout is the specific type of trout that is in our rivers. This is a dish that's being shown right now that the Rendezvous Bistro has done for a while. What I kind of wanted to do was, again, pull together the local Jackson Hole thing with Napa Valley, and actually to do a chutney, like a pluot chutney with olive oil, garlic, onion, like red bell pepper, and then that pluot, that the fruit to it, and just a little bit of sriracha, just a little bit of heat to expand it a little bit. So I wasn't able to prepare it today, but I think that'd be a really fun way to put it all together. Oh, and there is me enjoying my time with the trout. I release all the time, except for maybe if I'm on a backpacking trip up in the mountains. That one picture is the selfie, and then the one with taking the picture of a cutthroat trout in early October, and you can see recent snow that's just fallen in the Tetons, and the Grand Tetons, right in the very center of that picture there. So wow. I'll keep that one for a long time.
That is really, really gorgeous. You know, I think one of the things about Napa Valley and Jackson Hole is we both have tremendously active land trusts and tremendous conservation. And that's how we know that not just our food is sustainable, but our place and the beauty of our place is sustainable. Tell us a little about the sustainability of Jackson Hole. I know that your land trust is super active.
Yes, absolutely. The land trust is a big part, but besides that, this is the Grand Teton National Park, and there's Rendezvous Mountain, which is the top of our ski resort there. 97% of the land around that Jackson Hole area is preserved. It's held in some fashion, whether it's within a national park, being like Grand Teton or Yellowstone, one of the several national forests, or Bureau of Land Management property, as well as land trusts and other conservancies that are more focused right in Jackson Hole. That a view like that is never going to go away with very little bit of land development that will be happening ever.
That's really awesome. And we love that in Napa Valley. You know, we have more land permanently protected than we do have in Vineyards, and over almost 90% of Napa Valley is under some level of strict environmental control. So we hope that here too, if we keep voting to maintain our agricultural preserve, that we will be permanently protected like the Grand Teton. So 2 great places to visit when we're all back out again, as well as Boston, because I was going to be there this last month and seeing you, Daniel. So lots of places to look forward to while we sip in place. And we're going to keep doing those for a little while. Chef Todd, do you want to tell us what your pantry tip of the week is?
Sure, my pleasure. I started thinking about some seafood, obviously. You know, speaking of oysters, there's many different forms that you might find oysters in, and sizes and forms. And I thought that possibly even canned oysters. I know it's kind of a popular thing with some people, but they have smoked oysters, also canned oysters. So very much like you might find sardines or something like that, that might be sitting in your pantry. Those can work really well, whether they're smoked or not. You pop them open out of the can, maybe you drain or save some of the oil. If you happen to have some dried pasta around, you make a wonderful oyster pasta dish that might have some garlic, maybe some lemon, some fresh herbs like some parsley or something like that. And just make sure that you hit it with a good dose of some lemon zest or some lemon on the top there, and that should be really delicious.
That does sound delicious. So tell us what we're in for in the coming week. I think there's a couple great things you're going to be cooking for us.
There are. So I wanted to remind everyone that we are in the middle of our Great Sustainable Seafood Recipe Contest. So if any of you non-professionals or non-industry food enthusiasts at home who are interested in sending in some of your recipes to pair up with our Napa Valley Sauvignon Blanc, please do so, because it is very fun for us to go through, and it's a great experience for everybody. We all enjoy that. Besides our pan frying today, next week we're actually going to be going into our grilling technique. And thinking about grilling, and in particular, our local king salmon season is coming through here. Local salmon season opened up in the area here on the 1st of the month. And so we're going to showcase some grilled salmon. And then also pairing that up to go with our rosé. And our rosé is a beautiful mix. The reason we're selecting the rosé is because we're going to capitalize on some of the strawberries that are starting to show up seasonally through here. So we're going to work strawberries into it. So if you tune into that one, we'll talk a little bit about grilling. We'll also talk about how to pair up with a nice fruity fresh wine like our rosé.
All right, and this Saturday we have, you're teaching us all how to cook a great lobster dish, and we'll have a lot of fun. And I know that there's going to be some cornbread and some popovers being made at various homes. I'm hoping my husband's pulling out those popover pans because he makes a mean popover, but it sounds fantastic. Well, thank you all once again for joining us. And this week we'll be back again, as Chef Todd says, with the salmon and strawberry salsa and the rosé. And I'm sorry, I had 2 questions that I didn't answer, and I was going to sign off. The first question actually is back at Brooke. It's asking about our corks and why we're using a synthetic cork in the Virtú, which we've done a lot of research on, and a keen-eyed gentleman noted that we had swapped from natural cork to these new bio corks that do have an oxygen transfer level. Brooke, do you want to talk about that transition?
Sure. Yeah, we've done a lot of research on these corks that we have switched to, and it's actually incredible the control that we can get. We can pick exactly how much oxygen transfer we want to get with the type of closure we use. So we actually have done trials for the last 3 years, and we've picked the exact oxygen transfer we want for this wine, because we know we do want to have oxygen transfer. Obviously, you do get that with cork as well. It's not as controlled though with the cork as it is with these synthetic corks that we're using. So that's why we've made the switch for this particular wine.
Yeah, and these are biodegradable corks that we are using, the synthetic corks, so that's also kind of a nice feature. And Jorge wants to know when we're going to be open to the public. And I have to say, we're hoping that we will be open again in June. It will be a slow opening. We're anticipating just being open from the weekends unless there's a greater number of visitors coming up. So Friday through Sunday, we're looking forward to greeting you. And one of the things that you do need to know is that as a whole, Napa Valley will be going by appointment during this time while we're maintaining our distancing and being social simultaneously. So we want to ensure that we have the correct spacing. We'll be tasting outside. We'll be doing a little bit of indoor tasting, and kind of one of the really fun things that we're going to do just when you arrive, so that there's no gathering in a crowd and being too close to each other. We're going to whisk you away and let you blend your very own Virtú with each paid tasting. So you can make your own bottle of Virtú to take home and put Brooke and Michael up to your Virtú blend challenge while we have the 2018 components available. So we look forward to you doing that. And but do remember, when you come to Napa Valley, at least for a while, you are going to need to have reservations, because we are going to have pretty strict protocol as wineries as a whole, and of course St. Supéry to maintain our guests and our team's health. And so we look forward to having you back for sure. And I thought there was one more question that I missed here. It's kind of going by a little fast. And Saturday is our spring fling, which would have taken place outside at the winery this weekend. It's a little late to ship you lobsters, but if you have some St. Supéry wines and lobsters locally, Chef Todd will be demonstrating how to cook those at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So 5 o'clock East Coast time and 2 o'clock West Coast time. And we hope you can join us. So thank you so very much to all our special guests for coming again and joining us this week. And you, all of our neighbors, we appreciate you coming, and we wish you good health. And we look forward to seeing you next weekend. Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers. Thank you, everyone.
Cheers. Bye. Thank you.